Trump a short time ago telling Walmart that the company should, I'm quoting now, eat the cost, end quote, of higher tariffs. The comments come after the retail giant said this week that it would raise prices because of Trump's tariffs being too high. Walmart has more than 4,600 stores in the U.S. It's also the biggest private employer in the country with 1.6 million workers. Several countries that supply Walmart include China, and they're facing tariffs between 10 and 30% right now.
It began with a signature, and within 72 hours, America's largest retailer began pulling out of its own country. On April 3, 2025, President Trump signed Executive Order 14,257. The so-called Liberation Day tariffs launched a 145% import tax on Chinese goods and slapped a blanket 10% tariff on nearly every other trading partner. It was hailed as a declaration of economic independence, but in reality, it sparked the most chaotic supply chain collapse in U.S. retail history. Walmart didn't wait. Prices surged overnight. Distribution centers were shuttered. Over 50,000 employees received pink slips. And then came the shock. Walmart began severing its own logistics arteries, shifting operations out of the U.S., cutting purchase orders, and moving billions in sourcing to Vietnam and India. Quietly, the world's biggest retailer began packing its bags. And with it, so did the food. Eggs, beef, rice, canned staples, gone from shelves in dozens of cities. Grocery aisles emptied faster than they could be restocked. America's food security was no longer a policy debate. It was a shopping cart reality. This wasn't a boycott. This was economic retaliation from the very company that fueled America's low-price economy for decades. And it's only the beginning. The shockwaves began before Americans even understood what had happened. Executive Order 14,257, signed under the banner of economic liberation, was designed to punish China, reshore manufacturing, and bring jobs home. But what it actually did was throw a lit match into a dry supply chain already stretched thin from years of post-pandemic strain. The new policy imposed a 10% blanket tariff on most imports, sparing only Canada and Mexico, while targeting Chinese goods with a devastating 145% rate. Walmart, whose business model depends on large volume, low-margin imported goods, was immediately cornered. Executives warned the White House in advance. The math didn't lie. A 145% cost spike on goods from China would gut the retailer's margins. Essentials like electronics, tools, furniture, and even over-the-counter medicine, most of which still come from Chinese factories, would become unaffordable to stock, let alone sell. But Trump's team didn't back down. Let them adjust, one aide reportedly said. They did, but not in the way anyone expected. Walmart slashed 10 major U.S. distribution hubs, from Arkansas to Ohio, citing immediate cost realignment. Overnight, 50,000 workers were laid off. Thousands of trucks were pulled from the roads. Contracts with hundreds of small American suppliers were abruptly canceled. And prices? They skyrocketed. Beef jumped from $12 to nearly $14 per pound. Eggs surged by 22%. Imported electronics rose by 30% in just 2 weeks. Retailers like Walmart operate on timing, volume, and velocity. When that balance collapses, so does the system behind it. Walmart's internal forecast showed a projected $25 billion Q2 loss if it continued absorbing costs. So it didn't. Instead, it passed those costs on, first to the consumer and then to the economy itself. And behind closed doors, it activated a plan years in the making. Dubbed Operation Reset, Walmart began pulling sourcing operations out of the U.S. altogether. Ships bound for American ports were rerouted to Vietnam, Indonesia, and the UAE. Contracts with Indian textile and pharmaceutical manufacturers were accelerated. Chinese shipments, once offloaded at the port of Long Beach, were now being redirected to ports in Da Nang and Visakhapatnam. Walmart wasn't just adjusting its supply chain. It was abandoning the U.S. as a logistical center. In a leaked boardroom memo dated April 8th, a senior Walmart executive stated, "We can no longer rely on the U.S. policy environment to sustain global operations. We must adapt or collapse." And they weren't alone. Target, Home Depot, and Costco quietly followed suit. Target suspended orders for over 200 Chinese-based SKUs and began transitioning, to Indian suppliers. Home Depot canceled 3 upcoming US-based product expos, citing volatility in input costs. Costco raised membership fees and hinted at selective store closures in non-core zones. Meanwhile, the ports fell into chaos. The Port of Los Angeles reported over 13,000 abandoned containers by mid-April. Shipping companies, unsure if their goods would be cleared or taxed into oblivion, simply stopped unloading. Some vessels waited offshore for 12 to 15 days, racking up tens of millions in holding penalties. Others turned back entirely, rerouting to Canada or Mexico to offload goods outside U.S. jurisdiction. This wasn't a trade disruption. It was a trade evacuation, and it hit the most vulnerable first. Small businesses in rural America, especially those dependent on Walmart for inventory access, found themselves stranded. Hardware stores in Iowa, corner groceries in Mississippi, and pharmacy chains in Montana began reporting critical shortages. Basic inventory, missing. Essentials, marked up. Shelves, empty. In some towns, Walmart isn't just a retailer. It's the supply chain. Its departure was like the power going out. And for farmers, the blow was double-edged. On one hand, the rising price of goods meant operational costs soared. Fertilizers, packaging, equipment. On the other, Walmart's cancellation of supply contracts meant lost income. Milk processors in Wisconsin, beef producers in Texas, fruit distributors in California, all reported mass scaleback due to supply chain uncertainty. And it didn't stop at U.S. borders. In Africa and Southeast Asia, the knock-on effects of U.S. tariff volatility caused prices of grains, vegetable oil, and household items to spike. Global container availability fell by 19% in just 3 weeks. Ocean freight rates doubled. Some nations, like Bangladesh and Kenya, began rationing U.S. goods outright, redirecting funds to find alternate suppliers. In short, Trump's tariff war with China had gone nuclear, and the fallout was global. And yet, despite the damage, the White House didn't blink. In a press briefing on April 10th, the president doubled down. "We're done funding communism. If Walmart wants to move, let them. America will stand on its own." It was a defiant soundbite, but the market didn't buy it. By April 11th, Walmart stock had plunged 11.4%, dragging the Dow down 700 points. Wall Street was waking up to a terrifying realization. This wasn't just a retail crisis. It was a systemic rupture. And no one knew what would come next. As panic spread from grocery aisles to trading floors, Walmart accelerated the launch of its strategic escape plan, Project Reset. It was no longer just about weathering tariffs. It was about transforming the world's largest retailer into a post-American operation. At the heart of Project Reset were 3 seismic moves. 1. A $1.2 billion supply chain investment in Vietnam. Walmart finalized new mega hubs in Da Nang and Hai Phong, turning Vietnam into its future gateway for Asian goods. These hubs would bypass traditional U.S.-China channels entirely, streamlining operations through regional agreements and avoiding U.S. tariff bottlenecks. 2. The $5 billion Made in Heartland initiative. Despite the exodus, Walmart wasn't abandoning American soil completely. It was reconfiguring it. This initiative would build 6 new factory zones across the Midwest, focused on automating low-margin production, canned goods, over-the-counter medicine, and generic apparel. The goal? Regain price stability, without relying on China or volatile federal policy. 3. Link 16, Walmart's AI logistics command system. Backed by a $520 million rollout, Link 16 would operate independently of U.S. customs and border protocols, using predictive routing, contractless warehousing, and dynamic pricing to make real-time adjustments during economic shocks. In essence, it would allow Walmart to dodge future tariff ambushes before they even hit. But while Walmart rebuilt its empire in silence, America burned loudly. A lawsuit filed by a coalition of logistics firms, farmers, and state governors challenged Executive Order 14,257, calling it unconstitutional. Their argument? The tariffs, especially the 145% rate on Chinese goods, were issued without congressional oversight and violated standing trade law. On April 18th, a federal judge issued a temporary injunction, pausing enforcement of the Liberation Day tariffs. The ruling sent shockwaves through Washington. For a moment, Relief washed over importers, truckers, and small retailers. But the celebration didn't last. Why? Because the damage was already done. Walmart didn't reverse its plans. The distribution centers stayed closed. The laid-off workers weren't rehired. Cargo ships rerouted to Vietnam weren't coming back. And the AI logistics system, built to navigate chaos, was already online. Even if the tariffs disappeared tomorrow, the trust was gone. Other retailers took the hint. Amazon began renegotiating contracts in Eastern Europe. Lowe's signed a 3-year agreement with Indian exporters. Even Dollar Tree, a company defined by predictable low-cost goods, announced a global sourcing review, effectively signaling that its American-centered model was no longer viable. The dominoes were falling faster than Trump's administration could catch them. Meanwhile, Wall Street was bleeding. Consumer confidence dipped to its lowest level since the 2020 pandemic. The S&P Retail Index dropped 8.7% in 1 week. Credit agencies downgraded shipping companies, predicting Q3 defaults, and hedge funds began pulling out of U.S. commercial retail REITs, anticipating mass store closures in Q4. In real-world terms, that meant fewer trucks, fewer warehouse jobs, and even more empty shelves. Across Middle America, the impact was personal. In Kansas City, food banks saw a 19% spike in demand. In Cleveland, small retailers held emergency sales to liquidate Chinese stock before tariff enforcement resumed. In rural Arizona, pharmacies stopped selling certain generics due to inventory volatility. And yet, the administration clung to its narrative, America first. The problem? There was no one left to go second. Trump's base, which included millions of Walmart shoppers, began to fracture. Conservative talk radio turned on the White House, slamming the administration for sabotaging working families. Fox Business aired segments titled Tariffs or Tyranny. And in a Rasmussen poll taken April 21st, 62% of voters blamed the White House for the food crisis. It wasn't just political, it was psychological. For decades, Walmart represented more than just retail. It symbolized stability. Affordable groceries, consistent inventory, small-town lifelines. Now, it was a ghost. Not entirely gone, but gutted. Transformed into something global, automated, and distant. And this wasn't an accident. It was the logical conclusion of policy without foresight. In the vacuum left behind, opportunists rose. Black market resellers, counterfeiters, price gougers. Imported rice sacks marked up 80%. Spam sold by scalpers in parking lots. A gray economy was blooming beneath the wreckage of retail order. And the question began to surface, not in fringe media, but in the mainstream. What happens when the largest private sector employer in the U.S. no longer plays by American rules? Because Walmart didn't quit America out of ideology. It did it out of calculation. It ran the numbers, saw the fire coming, and moved faster than anyone else. It responded not with press conferences or patriotism, but with global realignment. And now, America is left with the echo. Empty shelves, jobless workers, a system exposed. Walmart didn't just raise prices. It raised the curtain on America's economic vulnerability. What began as a patriotic tariff campaign spiraled into a retail mutiny, one that exposed the fragile threads tying American consumers to global supply chains. Trump wanted to punish China. Instead, he pushed America's largest employer toward the exit. And in doing so, he shattered the illusion that any one country, no matter how powerful, can wage economic war without consequences. Now, shelves sit half-stocked. Families rethink grocery budgets. And small towns brace for an uncertain future as Walmart, once a symbol of local access and affordability, becomes a globalized machine, engineered to survive chaos, no longer anchored to any flag. The tariffs may be paused, but the trust is broken. And when trust breaks in the world's largest economy, what follows is contagion. So the next time you walk into a store and see higher prices, or fewer choices, or empty bins, ask yourself, was this worth it? If you think the public needs to hear this story, share it. If you want to stay ahead of the fallout, subscribe. Because this isn't the end of the crisis. It's just the first crack.